Welcome to the Liberty Block Live. Welcome to our first debate in what hopefully will be a series of debates. We have Mike Sanello over here.
Howdy, everybody.
He'll be arguing against me. I will argue in the affirmative that anarchism, or a total lack of government as we know it, is best for society in every sense. And he'll be arguing against that and defending his position throughout the debate. If you bear with us for 1 second, we're going to share this video on our Facebooks.
Yeah, so I'm going to just go over some basic housekeeping eventually here as soon as we get everything shared. First things first, welcome everybody. I don't know if I'm on the left or I'm on the right. I guess I'm on the left. Okay. I'm Mike Sanello. I'm from Connecticut originally, so a deep blue state. Moved to Tennessee just a few months ago. Finally got back into accord with Liberty Block. Elliot and I have known each other for a little over a year and a half.
Year or two, yeah.
So that's how I got acquainted with him. His family, and I are pretty much I would say, would you say this form the backbone of the Liberty Block right now?
Yeah, it was my family, and you and a few others were the original Liberty Block team.
Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and share this. We're live. Oh, also, it's just so everybody knows, I should probably say this. I should probably say this once we get everything shared and taken care of here, but I'm in the South, so we get these southern squalls, and I'm in the middle of one right now.
What's a squall?
Oh, it's these storms where the sky goes black, the wind goes to like tornado speeds, and you get these type of storms that you just don't get in the Northeast, where it rains about 1.5 inches in like 20 minutes. Nice. So I'm in the middle of a squall here. Let me go to my page. So I apologize to everybody if my feed's not going to cut out because the feed is on a backup, but if everything all of a sudden goes like really dim and you can barely make me out, and it's because the lights that are behind my camera are going to go out because they're not in the battery backup. So we may have to take a quick pause to get some flashlights, but it doesn't look like it's going to be that bad. And I'm in downtown Cookeville here, so shouldn't be an issue.
If it gets any darker, we'll declare me the winner by default. We'll say you forfeited.
Sure. All right. Sharing this to one more group. I'm sharing this to one more group, and then I should be ready to go.
And guys, feel free to comment if you have questions or comments. If you have a question for both of us, because we will have no moderator. So if you have a question for us, we will both try to address it if we see it in the comments here. We're on BeLive, but we'll see Facebook comments here, I believe.
Yeah, I mean, do you want me to just monitor Facebook, because I got 2 extra computers here I can handle this with?
Yeah, I mean, I'll see the comments here on my screen. I'll see all the Facebook comments. They come through BeLive because it integrates.
All right, you done sharing? Because I'm done sharing.
Yeah, I'm good. I shared it on my profile.
All right, so I guess I'll just do the housekeeping here. First things first. Welcome to the Liberty Block Live. I'm Mike Sanello. This is Elliot Axelman. Check us out on the Liberty Block at the Liberty Block. It's www.libertyblock.com. Do I have that right? All right. Mm-hmm. And follow us, of course, on Facebook so you can see all of our content up to date. We do have some housekeeping about this debate now specifically. First things first, it's going to be free form. We talked about having a moderator, but since, there's 2 of us and, we're not going to be shouting over each other. We have the ability to moderate. I think we have the ability to self-moderate. So there's not going to be any more moderator. We're going to do this fairly informally. We'll probably clock in around 30 minutes. I don't think that we're going to get more than an hour. I can't imagine it's going to take more than an hour to have this debate, since we agree on, honestly, far too much.
We agree taxation is theft, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So no hard cap on the time, but it'd probably be around 30 minutes or so. And do comment, do ask your questions. We won't be able to keep up with everything too much during the actual live stream, but we will try to get to a Q&A if we have some time, if we have the ability. At the end here. Elliot, I think you're a bit out of focus. Do you want to just give your camera a quick tap?
Is that better? Yeah.
You're still pretty out of focus. Did you accidentally bump your camera?
I don't think so.
Huh.
I think I like
Hold on. I'm watching the stream. Yeah. Okay, it got better. Yeah, got a lot better. All right. All right, so, well, now that we have everything framed, Elliot, I think since you're making the positive claim that we should have anarchy, let's do this.
Yeah. Voluntarism sounds a little less threatening to
Actually,
some.
hold on. One last element of housekeeping, just so everybody knows. Since this is informal, um, we don't have any notes in front of us. We don't have any books out. We're not going to be going on to Google and looking things up, not unless there's something that we both agree we kind of have to move the debate along.
Yeah.
But yeah, go ahead.
So
Frame the
I'll
argument. Here we
try
go.
to first define government because, of course, it could be defined in a few different ways.
Well, make your claim first, then we'll move
Oh
on.
yeah. So my general claim is that government, as we know it, on all levels, federal, state, and local, and all others, is an overall detriment to society. And if government were to be abolished like that, if possible, society would be better and not worse. And of course, we'll go through that throughout the debate. If I could, Mike, could I defend government how I see it, how I define it generally?
Well, I mean, you're making a positive claim, so let's hear your definition and let's see if we can agree on one.
Yeah, in general, I would define government because I think that it would have to be fair to acknowledge that some people define government as just any kind of organization among people in a community for efficiency's sake. I would define it in this sense. I want to debate it. The government is people organizing and essentially delegating force, the use of force, the justification for force, and the moral to create laws to a certain group of people who can then violate property rights by making some laws that criminalize acts other than true violence against people or property. So a government that creates laws and makes it illegal to do makes anything illegal other than murder and destruction of property or theft. If anything else is illegal, that is a government that I wouldn't support. Basic property rights is fine, but
okay. So that was a really long definition. So I'm going to try to condense what you've said into something that I think we can probably both agree on here. It is a body, because we have to have people involved. So it is a body that has been granted authority, either voluntarily or involuntarily, by individuals who have abdicated at least some degree of sovereignty, personal sovereignty.
Yeah.
So do we agree on that as a term? Because I just did that in about 15 words.
Well, you're a better wordsmith than I am. That's why one of our editors. That's why you make as much as the editor-in-chief as an editor.
So abdication of individual sovereignty to a body with authority. Right.
Yeah,
now,
I think that's fair.
I think where you went too far, and hopefully we won't have to have this part of the debate go on too long, is that you suggested that government is the sole repository for violence. And I don't think that a government has to be the exclusive repository for violence, even de jure, even on paper, for it to actually qualify as a government. So, I mean, in a dictatorial authority, you could easily have a situation where the governing body allows certain members of the society, certain civilians to, or even all civilians to, in certain cases, engage in wanton violence. So violence that's not like a boxing match where we both agree to beat the hell out of each other. Right. So, that's happened throughout society. That happened in the feudal era. In fact, Japan during its feudal era functioned as a government, if you want to call it that, like that. It was much closer to anarchy, I would say, than an actual formal system of governance until the Japanese unification. But all right, so your claim is that government is a detriment to society. Mm-hmm. All right. What is the difference to you between government and society?
I hadn't thought about that distinction.
Because
government is that body that people have delegated force to. Some people, or who generally believe that they have the moral authority, the justification to make laws and control people and do whatever they want to own the people, essentially, because they own all the property in their jurisdiction. Society is the collection of all the people that live in any kind of given space, any given area, like America.
Well, do you think that a society needs to have a shared system of values to be considered a society?
In general, I mean, values are probably up for interpretation. In general, I think a society functions better when they all have similar values. If they all advocate for freedom and property rights, of course. I'm not sure exactly how much it's necessary to have all the same values, but of course, any society would work better if they all do support free market and private property rights.
All right, so here's the basis for me arguing that, and do we agree that Well, here's the basis for my argument against your claim, right? So in a civilized society, we need to be able to come to terms with ourselves because endemic to the human condition is violence, right? You see it in chimps, you see it in basically all higher order primates. There is some degree of violence, especially with chimps. Chimps are incredibly violent, and even early hominids were incredibly violent. There might be some correlation between humans becoming more omnivorous and more carnivorous than they originally were, and coinciding with that increased level of violence. So human beings have a natural proclivity towards violence. The degree that's the case may vary from individual to individual and actually between cultures. Culture can overcome that. Civilized society can overcome that. But because of the fact that no man is an island and human beings are endemically violent, we need to have a way to interact with each other that we can agree upon. So in a proper society, you have the social contract as Hobbes actually framed it. Now, Hobbes doesn't make a clear distinction between government and society, which I kind of disagree with. But his contention was that if you're comparing a government that isn't actively killing you to anarchy, you always go with government. And I'm kind of agreeing with that notion that, obviously there's a difference between a government that is actively killing you and anarchy. That's a different argument. And that's not the argument I'm going to make, because if you have a dictatorship that's actively killing its citizenry, what government even is that? Right.
Well, the U.S. government surely kills people. Are we discussing the rate and making a distinction? The U.S. government kills. I'm sure plenty of people die in prisons when they're there for victimless crimes. Well,
are you making the claim that anarchy is better than government as we know it in the United States today, or that it's generally better? Because if we're making the general argument, then the case is that you have to have government. Like, it was Thomas Paine who famously said in the first sentence of the second paragraph of Common Sense, government in its best is a necessary evil. At its worst, it's an insufferable one. And he's right, but there is some degree to which we need a governing body. So if you imagine 1,000 people on an island, right? And actually what's happening in Oregon is a perfect analog for this debate. Because if the government in Portland just refuses to actually enforce the rule of law, then what rule of law do you even have? Now, obviously, they're going to be enforcing some rule of law, but if this was taken to its logical end, then in Portland, you'd have no rule of law. And that, to me, basically is anarchy. Anarchy is the absence of rule of law. So since there's no difference to me between a government that makes no effort whatsoever to enforce the rule of law and a government which doesn't have one, I think you'd be talking about anarchy. And then what you would have is Antifa, let's say, decides, well, we're going to be bullies and we're going to use violence and just kill everyone inside. Now, obviously, this is taking things to an end that we haven't yet seen. So what do you do to combat that? The locals that actually believe in the Second Amendment gather arms, form a military, and then you get war. At what point does the war come to an end? Well, there's a couple of ways that the war can come to an end. One is that you basically exterminate one side, right? And then you have an absolute military dictatorship. This is not fascism. This is a military dictatorship that controls the society. Now, if the absolute military dictatorship is not actively killing you, right, then that's an improvement over the state of anarchy where you have to fear for that faction that is killing you. Yeah, because whatever faction won will at least be trying to stamp out the faction that is trying to kill the other faction. And if it isn't killing you, then that's an improvement over anarchy.
Yeah, a few issues that I want to address. Antifa is commonly referred to as anarchists, and what Antifa do when they hurt people and kill people, it's referred to as anarchy. And as you mentioned in Portland, Oregon, when Antifa hurt some people, and the government, the mayor of Portland might have told the police to stand down and not arrest them or not protect the people. And we'll get to police protection later. You kind of made that seem like that would be an example of anarchy, and it's not. And that's why.
No. What happened was not anarchy. I said if we took it to its logical end.
Yeah. Well, I just want to make a distinction for everyone because some people believe that Antifa are anarchists. They're literally the opposite. They advocate for more government. Anarchism or voluntarism is just advocating for a peaceful society where everyone's peaceful, and there's no government who can rob you just
Well,
because
I mean,
you have the rights
their
laid out.
behavior is indicative of an anarchical perspective. But go
Yeah, so
ahead.
that's an issue that again, anarchy, and you talk a lot about language in your last video about what's considered common language, but common language has said
Common
over the last,
parlance.
yeah, common parlance in the last 100 years or so, taught in the government education system, teaches that anarchy should be associated with mass violence and disorder. That's really not, and I hate to go all semantic definition, but in Latin, as I'm sure you know, means the absence of,
Without.
and narchy, like monarchy, means ruler. So it means without rulers. Anarchy means without rulers. Now, are some anarchists bad people?
But nobody in common parlance, which is what we're having to debate with, is common parlance. Nobody's referring to anarchy as just the absence of a singular ruler, right?
That's
Because
honestly what I thought we were doing. Anarchism, no, I'm not talking about monarchy, absence of monarchy. I'm talking about the absence of rulers, so the absence of government. So anarchism, if you're in the libertarian circles of anarchism voluntarists, when they say anarchism, they don't mean blowing stuff up and being violent. They mean the opposite. They mean not having a government, not having rulers. They mean
but
being
how do you ensure individual sovereignty without something to ensure the individual sovereignty? And here's what I mean. What if you and I are on a desert island with one other person? What exactly is preventing me from just beating the hell out of you for no good reason?
Ultimately, self-defense. And in an anarchist society, in a society with no government, self-defense would be much more balanced because the people, as you know, the fire.
No, because then you have playground rules.
Yeah,
playground rules. The side with the greatest capacity for violence wins.
So that's again another big distinction. People think that again, anarchism, all of small government's been painted in a bad light by the authoritarian regime, the organized crime running our schools called government. They make it seem like an anarchy will have mob rule. Realistically, democracy, which America is 99.9% of democracy, because really, besides for the presidency, which is electoral college, everything else is direct vote. In fact, it's worse than majority. Plurality wins with 49% or 48% or 3% in some cases. So that is actually mob rule, only it's actually even worse. And as you know, mob rule is gang rape, literally. There's a famous joke, 9 out of 10 people enjoy gang rape. Yeah, that's referring to mob rule, which is democracy. Voting to take someone's rights away is so inherently immoral. I think we're both in
but okay, in scale, how on earth do you otherwise do that? Now I realize that there is no such thing as the perfect government, right? We had it very close. Would you agree with me that if you were to idealize a government, it would be basically the United States 1885? Or the Coolidge administration.
1785?
18.
So again, a few things, and I've gotten more pessimistic every day. I get more pessimistic, to be honest. But a few years ago, I would have said that 1776, knowing the little bit I know about back then, about the Articles of Confederation and then the Constitution, was probably somewhere between super libertarian and just about anarchist, because there were probably no laws. There were zero gun laws, just about zero taxes. I believe there was no income tax back then. Very, very little taxes and laws. Compared to our U.S. government today, the amount of laws and taxes and overall freedom, it was probably about 1/millionth of the government and the restrictions on freedom.
Do you mean 1776 or 1787?
Throughout in the inception of the U.S. So 1776 up until around 1790. In 1800 or so, with Marbury versus Madison, 1800, 1810, the Supreme Court already
3, I think.
1803 maybe. The Supreme Court already kind of ruled that, well, we can just rule that the Supreme Court does not have the power to rule on this, which is kind of just ducking the question. And then 1860, of course, Lincoln destroyed the Union further. And then in 1930, of course, Teddy Roosevelt in the early 1900s, then FDR in 1930 destroyed the country more. So I think the country was destroyed pretty quickly. The beginning of the end might have been in 1800, according to some people who are more familiar with Marbury versus Madison than I am. But the beginning came very quickly. Actually, didn't George Washington, right after he assumed the presidency, create a new liquor tax or something that was probably unconstitutional or illegal that caused another rebellion?
No, it was you're talking about Shays' Rebellion. And that actually happened during the Articles of Confederation. What happened was there was a tax passed on liquor in Western Pennsylvania. And this is actually an argument for a federal government, by the way, that there was no way for Pennsylvania to actually suppress the rebellion. And get people to sit down at a table and have common terms and say, all right, we're going to put our guns down. We're going to stop fucking killing each other. And we're going to agree to terms that we can all, compromise on this or make a clear argument. We're going to use our words, not our guns. So they couldn't do that with the non-standing army of the state of Pennsylvania. They had the Pennsylvania militia, and they were an entirely voluntary organization. So what happens when you call out the militia with the state of Pennsylvania and they say, yeah, screw that, we're not going. We're not going out to Western Pennsylvania to shoot other Western Pennsylvanians. Well, that was the argument for a federal government. And in fact, that would be your argument if you were going to have one for a standing army rather than a strict militia, because the militia is an entirely voluntary group that could just
let's
say,
rewind
screw it. We're not.
Let's rewind a little bit. Why did Shares' rebellion happen? Because there was a new tax to pay off some more war debts, right? So there was a new tax, and again, as my shirt says, taxation is theft, and it's just immoral to take property from others. So again, in an anarchist society, in a society without government and taxes, number one, either there would be no government, or there could be a government. But again, I would not argue that a government shouldn't exist, but I would have some pretty strict.
Well, that's what anarchy is the absence of rule. And I would argue that in common parlance, it's the absence of rule of law, because there's no difference between a government that doesn't actually govern and the non-existence of government.
Yeah.
Because on paper, yes, a government that does absolutely nothing and does absolutely nothing to govern its people is de jure a government on paper, but so that would not technically meet the definition you provided for anarchy. But in common parlance, that's anarchy, because they're not doing anything.
Yeah. So I mean, I don't want to make it seem like I'm not going to defend my position. I believe that, again, in common parlance, where government institutes laws, I don't believe that they should exist. I think, again, are people.
Well, hold on. How on earth do you get the Shays Rebellion situation to result in something that isn't just absolute genocide of one side?
Well, it wouldn't have happened. It literally happened in response to attacks.
No, I'm saying, but that's going to happen anyways. So if you have
taxes in an anarchist society.
All right, let's have the discussion then. Anarchy, as a rule, is really rare in history, and at least in recorded history, right? We have, we have the 30 Years' War in what is now mostly Germany. You have the certain parts of the English Revolution. You have basically the War of Roses. You have the pre-Roman invasion, Scottish Highlands, which were basically in a state of anarchy. What you had was playground rules, and playground rules led to non-stop bloodshed. And since there was no surety of individual sovereignty against the bloodshed, if I'm a farmer and I'm making oats, right, and you and I want to engage in a mutually consensual transaction for these oats, you shoe my horses, I'll give you some oats. Okay, no big deal. Now, if you say no, that's not right, and decide to just steal my oats, in a state of anarchy, there's no way for me to ensure that you don't do that unless I.
Again, the community would either ostracize, if it's a violent crime, they could prosecute, something like vigilantism, but they could prosecute that person.
But there's nothing. Yeah, but first things first, unless you're arguing that that is that they're going to form a proper society, then what you're talking about is a social contract, and that effectively is government, right? So if we all come to terms, shake hands, and say, all right, you know what, I'm not going to steal your oats anymore. Well, I stole your oats. That was wrong. Let's shake hands. Let's get this taken care of. What actually is going to bring them to the table? The only thing that could do that is government.
Yes,
the only thing.
In a minute, I can outline my ideal society, which again would be seen in common parlance as an anarchist or voluntarist society. But before then, I just have a question for you. Of all the examples of governments on federal and state levels, and even county levels throughout history, there are probably thousands. Have any of a single one neglected to grow, and have any of them allowed for people to actually be free? Because most of them claim to allow citizens to be free. Have any of them let citizens be free in history?
Yes. Now, I will agree with you on this matter, and there's an obvious response to that. That yes, governments tend to grow too big. Governments tend to once you begin the ability to cede involuntarily individual sovereignty from individuals by the government. Yeah, yes, that's something that is going to snowball into a tyranny, right? And this is why I absolutely agree with Jefferson when he said that something. You say it, because I don't know the phrase off the top of my head. That the tree of liberty needs to occasionally be.
I think he said occasionally, or every so often, or every generation, the tree of liberty must be watered with the blood of tyrants and patriots.
Yeah, with the blood of tyrants and patriots. So I absolutely agree with that. Now, in 1776, we weren't fighting a revolution towards anarchy. We were fighting to replace a tyranny with a proper government. Now, the government that we replaced it with was the one formed by the Articles of Confederation, which was probably too weak of a government, and that's why we actually have the Constitution we have today that formed an actual federal government. So, so people don't probably understand that the United States was not actually a singular nation until the Constitution came around and established an actual federal government. It was the Articles of Confederation were basically nothing more than a treaty between the states. And
but after the Constitution was ratified, didn't states still exist by name? State.
Yes. Yes. Right. And we're one of the few nations across the globe that refers to our provinces as states. That's probably because, at least on paper, they have significantly more freedom to operate than any other country in the world.
States. And state is a synonym with country.
No, this is why we have state lowercase s and state uppercase s. So there is a federal government, right? And the states have to adhere to the rules of the federal government, right? And even from a corporate perspective, even from a multinational corporation's perspective, you don't want to have, Jeff Bezos telling his forklift operators how to operate the forklift, right? So that's why at the higher levels of even outside of government, when you have an organized group of people at the highest level, you want to have as basic a standard of control as possible, right? So this is the libertarian perspective. And this is where I would argue that a good libertarian, and I'm not trying to make a no true Scotsman argument, but a good libertarian, not a true libertarian, but a good libertarian understands that there is a role for government, and that one role is to ensure and secure individual liberty. And that's it.
Yeah, I agree. And
so an anarchist is not a libertarian. A libertarian should not be an anarchist.
Yeah. So you actually, obviously, you framed it very well right there. A libertarian would say that a government should exist, and their primary purpose, and maybe their only purpose, should be to secure life, liberty, property,
individual liberty.
Yeah,
individual liberty. And yes,
now,
and
from there, the issue, and I just wrote an article about this, and I referenced the Kokesh video when Adam Kokesh was on Judge Napolitano's show. But again, I used to believe this too. Obviously, I went from conservative to libertarian, and now I'm a voluntarist. And here's why. It says in the Declaration of Independence, which is really the article. I don't care if it's legally considered, legal or not. It's the article. It's
it's the framework for all of new American values.
Left the British Empire. It says that the reason being created among men, the government is created to protect life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Now, two things. Number one, the government no longer protects life, no longer protects liberty, and no longer protects my pursuit of happiness. What makes me happy is driving without a seatbelt in Massachusetts while carrying. I can't do that. So the government does not protect any of my rights. And furthermore,
anarchy doesn't either.
Yeah, but we're saying the absence of government. Again, anarchism is kind of like cold. It doesn't exist. It's the absence of heat, right? Dark can't exist. It's the absence of heat, right? Anarchism would be, generally in a society, would be the absence of government, right? So it would be people ruling themselves, self-governance, self-ownership, and all that. Furthermore, the second point is that even beyond, they don't protect my rights. They are the single biggest threat to my life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness, the government.
Right, as they're manifest right now. So if your argument is that we should have a revolt to form a more proper government and more proper governing body, absolutely. But if the revolt is to just result in anarchy, then there's no protections either. So there are playground rules, but there are also playground rules in government.
A few more things that I should mention, and I think this is a meme, but it's a pretty good quote as well that I heard a few months ago or a year ago or so. And it said, and again, this is one of the things that changed my mind from libertarian towards voluntarism. Someone said, the government isn't broken. The U.S. government. It's not broken. It's working exactly the way it was designed.
Oh, well, I mean, yeah. And then you need, if you take the Jeffersonian perspective, which is as close as you're going to get to a libertarian perspective, and I think is the model for libertarianism, then what you need to do is have an overthrow of that government and form a more perfect government. Now, your argument would be for no government. Now, I get what you're saying, suggesting with voluntarism. Like so what you basically would get is these factions. You get these individualized factions where everybody agrees to everything. And unfortunately, because of what's endemic to human nature, we're a flawed species. Mm-hmm. Not only are you going to get factions so small that you're going to get basically the Scottish clans, that as soon as two clans have to interact, and in order for us to actually exist in 2019, yes, we have to. No man is an island. right? There's no way to have a productive means of engaging between people if you don't engage. So they're going to engage. Also, it's part of human nature.
The greatest of relationships and communities and groups are voluntary and free market in nature.
Right, but if the two groups then say as groups, let's say one group does, let's say you have specialization, which by the way you can't get in Anarchy. Let's say you have specialization somehow, right? Where one town is making nothing but steel and one town is making nothing but cars. You need the cars to make the steel, or sorry, let's say engines. You need the engines to make the steel. You need the steel to make the engines. So there is an obvious exchange that ought to be happening between the two of them that is going to benefit both of them, right? Well, one way you could do that is to steal the steel. No, that's going to be a mouthful. Steal the engines, right? Because you need the engines to make the steel. Steel factory is going to steal the engines. Even in a situation where you have an absolute dictatorship, where that isn't actively killing you, it's doing something. It's doing something.
So police protect us from theft, right?
Right. So that's the idea. Now, how that would necessarily manifest, yeah, you're right. There are certain situations in which a coup is deserved, right? But if you have anarchy, all you have is just constant playground rules, and we fall back on our early hominid ancestry, which is basically what you see in chimps, where you have troops that cannot get very large, that just beat the hell out of other chimps and take their territory by force and kill them all. So that's what you had in the 30 Years' War. That's what you had in the English Revolution. That's what Hobbes was writing about.
If someone were going to steal my engine out of my car, just sitting in my garage right now, you would say that police would protect me. And if I said, no, my town's police would not protect me because they don't really care about my car or my engine or me, you'd say...
Well, what's the difference then between that and anarchy?
What's that?
What's the difference between that and anarchy?
Yeah, that's my question. So at least in anarchy, so let's say I do live in Connecticut. Obviously, I live in a state where I can technically have a firearm. If I lived in New York like I used to, or I lived in Connecticut where you used to, in the state of government, I would not be able to protect my property and my engine with a firearm because it's illegal.
So it's an improper government.
Exactly, yeah.
Okay, so I would still suggest that then necessarily that government, there might be some degree to which that's the case. However, if the government is not killing you, then I would totally disagree with that, because at least in a system where you have a government, no one is actively killing you, right? So in Connecticut, although your sovereignty over your self-defense has been abdicated entirely to the government, let's say. It's not the case in Connecticut, but let's say it is. Then if the government isn't using that violence to kill you, that's a good thing. Because if everyone has agreed to abdicate that violence, what?
How many others must I kill?
Well,
if I'm dead, I couldn't be in this debate or argue or fight the government. So we have to fight.
Right. Okay. So there is a threshold. There is a threshold, but if the number is 0, we've not reached that threshold.
0 what?
So there's a threshold for deaths before you say that we would prefer anarchy. If there has been 0, then, or is going to be 0, then we have not reached that threshold. So in a society where the government is not killing you, and when I say you, I don't mean you, Elliot Axelman, I mean killing its denizens, then that is better than anarchy, because in a state of anarchy, there is no surety of any kind against playground rules, right? So there is no threat of violence from some other outs. So if you have the threat of violence from literally everyone around you, which is what anarchy is, because there's nothing that is protecting you against that threat of violence other than your own self, which you have in any government. That's why the Second Amendment is a right. It's not just the Second Amendment is a protection of a naturally existing right to self-preservation, right? So you have the right to own a gun and use it in self-defense regardless of government, because what exactly is preventing you from having a gun and using it in self-defense without obviously like massive ridiculous tyranny, right? Because you could go to the hardware store, buy some pipe, and improv an air rifle, right? It's tough, but you could do it. And it's like freedom of speech. Even if you cut out my throat, I will still have the ability to use my hands to sign. Yeah. Right. I will still be able to write on a piece of paper.
So right now, again, you said, let's say we're both in Connecticut, or half of the U.S. states, or around half of the areas that forbid firearm ownership unless you jump through massive hoops, or in New York City's case, pay them $100,000 for a permit if you want to bribe them.
Let's talk about London.
Yeah, London. Yeah. So in London, the police, again, 100, 200 years ago, you probably could own firearms. In London, it's probably extremely difficult to carry a loaded handgun. It's probably nearly impossible.
It's basically impossible.
Yeah.
There's no difference between impossible and what they have.
And you would say that that's not even a decent argument for abolishing government, because it's just that government's gotten bad, right? So imagine we start over in London or in America, and within 3 years, the police again, the government and the police start banning guns. And then again, Mike, you say, Ali, you are right about government sucking and growing, but it's just the wrong government to start again. How many times are you willing to cycle it over again and try again and again and again?
An infinite number of times, because every time that you revolt and descend into anarchy, you are still in anarchy, right? Because a permanent state of revolt is the same thing effectively as anarchy, because you have a permanent situation in which in which you have playground rules, right? If you're going to, what the United States did in declaring their independence and their sovereignty from Great Britain and engaging in a war, was suggesting that one side is going to win by virtue of pure violence. That's what playground rules effectively is. The side that can kill that has the greatest ability to kill will win.
It sounds like mob rule, but we've already established, and I think you agree, that democracy is literally mob rule, right?
Well, no. Hold on, before we get to that point, though. So if what exactly is the difference between total revolt, right? We're talking total revolt in this case, and anarchy. And if you're just constantly having these revolts, this is what you're going to have with anarchy: is just endless violence until you come up with a government.
I think we're still missing each other on the definition again, because the circles I've been in recently, lucky enough to be in New Hampshire over the last year and a half, of people, when they really discuss anarchism, it's honestly with pictures, their hashtag anarchism, hashtag voluntarism. It's a picture of them homeschooling their kids and saying, without, I can only do this when there's no government or very little government, or really, governments throughout the world make it either illegal or extremely difficult to homeschool kids. In New Hampshire, it's easier than almost any other state, I believe, any other state, and still there are a few things you got to check off before you homeschool your kids. When they say
how are kids schooled in 1792?
Oh, it was all homeschools and eventually
it was all private and homeschool.
Yeah.
All of it.
Governments grow, right? Like a super duper.
Okay, so then what you need to do is occasionally, sow the roots of the tree of liberty with the blood of tyrants.
Yeah.
Right. And this is why we have a system of checks and balances, because if you had, so for example, what you keep talking about with democracy is I'll call it the tyranny of the majority, where if you have just a strict popular vote, then you and I on an island with another dude could vote between the two of us to kill the other dude. Right. So what's preventing that? What is ensuring that we won't actually do that to that other dude? So that's where we need a system of checks and balances. So, now, I don't think we have to have a long debate about what that system actually is, but the whole point is that a government like our federal government should be bogged down in bureaucracy. It should be bogged down. It should be really difficult to get anything to pass through. This is actually the argument for the way we elect our president today versus just a strict popular vote, right? It should be hard for you to get all of the right. So if you're in New York, if you're in the state of New York, for example, if you have a popular vote, you win 5 counties, and well, it's actually more like 6 counties. You win 6 counties, you win the state, right? But if you had an electoral college system in New York, you'd have to win 51% of the Bronx, 51% of Manhattan, 51% of Kings County, 51%, right? And yes, you might actually win election with fewer votes than the one who won the popular vote, but that's not what matters. What you won was a significantly greater majority of interests within the state. So if you're able to make an argument that appeals to Manhattan, that also appeals to, Broome County, then that's an argument that I think is more an adherence to the greater state of New York than it is
better, but not perfect. You know why?
Right. No, and it's not perfect, but that's the argument for the electoral college system, it's a system to help control and mitigate the tyranny of the majority.
Still 80% or 99.9%, unless it's 100% of the vote. I can't see how there could be a master who can make laws. Again, in New York State's case, where they do have very strict laws in homeschool, and private school, where Jews, as you know, the religious Jews in Muncie, upstate New York, but also in New York City, to be honest, they want to do their own thing. And in New Jersey, this is about the crap's about to hit the fan in New Jersey, because New Jersey also just passed a new law for public school. For now, I'm sure it'll expand to private school because government programs expand. It mandates that public schools teach the students about LGBT history. Of course, I have family with a child in public school in New Jersey, and she already will have to learn it. But, some other family I have who are Jews who have kids in private school, eventually they will have to do this, and that will obviously violate their freedom, of course. And then,
all right.
Yeah.
No, keep going.
Yeah, just a few other issues that I have to point out. It seems like you may be using anarchy as a state of revolution. Again, anarchism literally just means the state of...
No. I mean, I'm saying that there's not much difference between absolute revolution and anarchy. I'm not saying one is the same thing. I'm saying that they're relatively near, not perfect. They're effective analogs. They're effective analogs. It's a useful way to create. It's a useful way to create an analog, something that you can actually see, something you can actually think about easily.
That, though. Anarchism is just the state of living without masters. Revolution is generally a temporary state, right?
Right.
It's just, anarchism, an anarchist society would just be a society without masters.
Okay, so let's take a society without masters, right?
We don't have any.
And we're gonna have to use some magic here to get this to happen, right? Yeah. We're waving a magic wand, right? So imagine an island out in the Pacific, right? That's isolated enough to be its own society, right? Where you're not going to have threat of let's just say it's an island out in the Pacific, right? Where the threat from outside forces is minimal, but still there, right? And we're going to throw 1,000 people on this island.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. How do we ensure that in that society, right? Like if it's just one person on that island, who cares? You don't need a government, right? In that case, that man is an island, right? But since no man is an island, you throw 1,000 people on that island, you say, go. Okay. What you start off with is anarchy. Okay. At what point does it become violent, and how on earth do you mitigate that violence?
Again, and this is why the debates on related to anarchism, voluntarism, and anything with less government than a libertarian government gets so complicated, because ultimately, and I'm going to say this, and you're not going to like it, and it's not a great argument on my point, but ultimately, for anarchism to work, a society has to be just. As I think Jefferson, or one of the founders, said, this country was only created for a moral people. An anarchist society can only work if all of society understands that it is incumbent upon them to respect property rights. If people
but human beings are inherently flawed. Well, they're not just flawed; they're inherently flawed. So that'll never happen.
So again, in my vision of a perfect society, if let's say in New Hampshire the government didn't exist, or all of the government officials left on every level in New Hampshire, and we just had citizens, in general, I know people in New Hampshire. The people in general, again, there are some violent people and some sociopaths. In general, people are good people who respect property rights. Now, when the violent or sociopaths or foreign people from New York, of course, and from Connecticut do come to rob people here, and they rob someone, here's what's going to happen. And this is the big distinction, the 1 second clip that's going to make the whole debate. They will be rejected and condemned and punished by society. When a person from Connecticut drives up here and robs someone's house and steals their car and steals all their money, they will be rejected. Currently, in any system of government, so anything other than anarchism, even a libertarian government like America, the libertarian government we have, because that's what the Constitution created, currently they are not condemned if they are wearing blue. What I want is for all real theft to be condemned. That's all I'm asking for. Is that anarchism? Is it not? I don't know. All I'm asking for is all government, all theft, all violation of property rights, even done by the government with 99% of the vote, those who elected, those people love, like everyone here loves Sununu, you love Trump, that's fine. Anyone who does it without a 100% vote, meaning without direct 100% explicit consent by the person, it is theft, and it is just wrong. Because
no. I'm not suggesting that it is. I'm not suggesting that I like it. I'm saying that it's something you have to do. For example, when you eat Taco Bell and you have to blow it out your ass, I don't like it, but I have to do it, right? So, in the case of the tyranny of police, then perhaps it's time to overthrow. But again, in the case of a situation where, let's say, the police are not killing anyone, right?
But they're violating my rights. Police have violated me a few times.
They have to. there has to be an abdication of individual sovereignty of some kind, because there are individuals out there who, if you allow them their sovereignty totality, are going to engage in activities that we can't justify.
So period. Privacy and freedom versus security, you err on the side of security and not freedom and privacy?
No, here's what I would say. If we're going in a just government, the best government is
your ideal government.
Right. So in the ideal government, then you have the maximization of the sovereignty of the individual, which means that you need to, in some cases, form a military and ensure that Canada doesn't come in and just kill us all. Right. How on earth do you agree? How on earth do you agree to form that military, right, without something that is the exact that is government? You can't do that, right? And that's the social contract. Now, I realize there is such a thing as an absolute monarchy, for example, that doesn't kill its citizens. Okay, so that's a less perfect government, right? That is significantly a less perfect government than what I'm discussing here.
Yeah, and again, a militia.
And your argument that everything that everybody agrees on, there is not one thing that every human being on Earth agrees on.
Exactly.
Right. So that's why you can't have a system that is based on whatever. We're only going to have the rule of law based on what, not the majority, not 99%, what everyone agrees on. And I will point out to you that I wholly accept the notion that the 0.1% could be correct, because, I mean, and the perfect example of that is music today, right? Like, the fact that Cardi B is incredibly popular doesn't make her good, right? Mm-hmm. So I agree on that. But at some point, you have to say to yourself, how on earth do you ensure the maximization of individual liberty without at least some voluntary abdication of that sovereignty? So for example, if I give away 1% of my sovereignty to ensure 5% that's going to be taken away if my neighbor decides to constantly be burning down my barn, right? Like if my neighbor is constantly burning down my barn, well, then what I need to do is have people get together, because I can't beat him up. He's bigger than me. It's Anderson Silva, right? It's Anderson Silva. He's going to kick my ass, right? So there's nothing I can do. So we need to band together and go over to his place and say, listen, you can't keep doing that. That's in an ideal society. Now, in a state of anarchy, what would happen is, in a state of anarchy, what would happen is Anderson Silva is going to kick my ass. So you know what I'm going to do?
Anarchism, no humans will ever have any kind of relationship with each other ever voluntarily. In an anarchist society, like in my society, we have an unwritten rule where we have a community watch. We all are the community watch. We all have.
But there's no way that rule can possibly actually manifest in reality unless it's actually written, unless it's actually agreed to.
How? You're right. There's an issue with anarchism, because ultimately it's going to come down to the protection of people's private property rights and their freedoms and their privacy is ultimately going to be incumbent upon every person to be ever vigilant. It's going to be incumbent upon the people themselves to thoroughly reject all violations of property and life. When people rob or steal, you have to reject them. The problem is that in any government, even the most libertarian, amazing governments, like the one created by the US Constitution that conservatives seem to love, even in that one, the government does violate property rights. So we have.
Of course it does. Of course it does. But that's what I'm suggesting is that that's what I'm suggesting, that even that a perfect society, you have to have some abdication of individual sovereignty. In anarchy, you have a crap load of individual sovereignty that you're sacrificing. So when
you're the president of the U.S. or if you're the governor of Tennessee,
do you want me to be president or do you want me to be God King?
No way.
For this thought experiment.
No, that's a creepy name to give Trump, to be honest. I never got it. It's really weird. But if you're the governor of Tennessee, and I have to move down there because let's say they mass up New Hampshire, and you're the governor of Tennessee, you said that, obviously you're pretty libertarian. You'd be the best governor they had, obviously. But you just said that you would agree that humans who live in a society with a social contract have to abdicate at least around 1% of their personal sovereignty.
Well, I'm not going to attach a number to it, but there has to be some abdication.
Yeah. Some you have to give over some of your rights. What if I refuse to give over any? So what would those rights be, right? You'd have some zoning laws, you'd have some speed limits, even if they're fast. You'd have some restrictions on hard drugs, maybe. What if I refuse all of those things and I I bang goats and I snort coke in my backyard.
Okay, so this is what I mean. This is what I mean, right? If you maximize, if you the like we agreed that violence is part of the human condition, right? And I think that we should also probably state for everyone who's watching that the formations of government are endemic to the human condition as well. That's why anarchy is so rare, and that's not actually an argument for government at all, nor is it an argument for anarchy. It's just when we're trying to, this is why we're not using a debate about how it's actually manifested, like the debate against communism. You could say, well, communism killed 100 million people in the 20th century. Well, you can't really do that with anarchy because it's only happened like 5 or 6 times, right, in recorded history, and they're very short periods. So it's just part of the human condition to so that's why we're not using that argument. But in a state of anarchy, there are certain sureties of rights that you don't have, right? And in order to have the surety of those rights, you have to abdicate, for example, your inclination towards violence, right? So you have to say, all right, I'm not going to shoot Farmer Brown. I'm not going to burn down his barn. I'm not going to steal his horses, right? If you just have a society where you're going to say you're unwilling to sacrifice that degree of individual liberty, that is not how you get to a civilized society.
Are you saying that in order to assure that I'm protected, I have to give up some of my freedom?
Of course, because in an anarchist society, you have the freedom to kill people.
Exactly. So that's where, again, it's just a definition issue. In my definition of an anarchist society, the one thing they believe in, and I've written the Constitution, which is kind of a non-constitution, but I did write a whole Constitution. But again, the only real crime, and again, this is incumbent upon humanity. It's hard to argue because it's kind of out there in the abyss. It's not concrete. It's incumbent upon society to reject violations of property rights. Murder is bad.
How do you get them to actually do that?
People, what I'm saying is, in my ideal society, in an ANCAP society, anarcho-capitalist, where people respect private property rights, not like the anarcho-communists, which don't really make sense, but in an anarcho-capitalist society, a voluntary society, what I want, again, in my dreams, you can't say I'm wrong because I'm just talking about my dreams. I'm just telling you what I have in my dream. My dream is that people in a society, so in my town or my state or my country, totally reject all violence and theft, even when perpetrated by those voted in by a few people, like 49% or 3%, or by people wearing blue and badges. That's right. All I support.
And you know what? Elliot, in a world where human beings are without flaw, okay, then we don't need government, right? Because we're without flaw. But human beings are flawed. That's just the nature of the human. That's just the nature of the human condition.
With freedom, how do you trust them with power?
Well, exactly. That's why you want to limit that power where you can. But in certain situations, you have to abdicate some sovereignty to another authority.
Yeah,
right? You have to.
The next debate, another reason why. So obviously we've discussed why it's difficult for me to.
And I hope I've made it clear. I don't like government.
Yeah, I know. I
don't like government. It's just something you have to deal with, right?
So now a reason why anarchism is tough to defend sometimes, but it's kind of easy to defend it because if you have any kind of government, they're going to be either any government system is bad. Obviously, we have the quote, democracy is the worst form of government besides all the other forms. But if you're going to have government, like we have, let's say in the US, they're generally voted upon, meaning ultimately, even though it was supposed to be a republic where we have rights that can't be touched, ultimately everything is up for being restricted or being amended by people who are voted in, obviously. It could be by amendment process, but ultimately if there's 90%, anything can be done, including amending the Constitution, if 90% of Americans want it, right? Meaning we have mob rule. We do have mob rule. So the 10%, Jews are less than 10%. Right now, if everyone in America votes, we need to take all the money from Jews, it will happen. They will amend the Constitution. There's nothing else. There's no ACLU, no First Amendment, nothing. No Fourth Amendment, doesn't matter. If they amend the Constitution to read, all Jews shall have all wages confiscated by Congress, they can do it. 90% can do it. Ultimately, you have to realize that every single form of government, ultimately, and a monarchy is worse or better than this government because it sucks. But ultimately, every can grow its own power by voting.
I would argue that if you had a monarchy where you had, the perfect, if you had Christ the King as the monarchy, as a monarch who could live forever somehow and was absolutely perfect in everything they did, and had infinite knowledge. So the Laplace's demon, for example, if you had that, then okay, yes, monarchy would be the best form of government.
If you're defending government, ultimately you have to acknowledge that in the United States and in this world, really the whole universe, governments are elected by elections, not by magical God or Christ coming down and tapping them.
Yeah.
The church anointed them or whatever. So they're elected. So ultimately, how do you?
No. Hold on. Governments are not necessarily elected. Governments are not necessarily elected.
All right.
Monarchies are not elected. Dictatorships are not elected.
Our American government in America,
okay,
politicians in general are elected, right, by vote. Now, if there's a vote on a small level, on a big level, how do you justify giving someone my rights? I stayed home. As you might know, around 50%, or I believe more than half the country, half the voters, stayed home in 2016. How do you reconcile giving away their rights when they didn't even have a say? You're saying, I want Trump to do Trump policies. I want Clinton
to... Because they had a say and didn't use it.
They actually didn't. They wanted to vote for someone else.
Yes, they did.
Anarchist.
Yes, they did. They
wanted no government.
There was a candidate there in 2016 that didn't get much of the vote that was advocating for a libertarian model of government.
A tiny decrease in 1/1000000000 of 1%. Yeah.
Yeah. And again, if everyone who stayed home voted for Gary Johnson, then we would have a libertarian in office today and not Trump.
Yeah.
Right. So, no, I totally disagree with that. And again, you're never going to get everyone to agree on everything.
But here's the problem.
You'll never get everyone to agree on one thing.
Yeah, but property rights get complicated, right? Because if of those 50 million people who stayed home, or whatever the number was, I guess it was half. So it was, around 75 million, I guess. If even a tenth of those were anarchists who really wanted no government, they just want to live on their farm, be a good person, and pray to their God. A lot of anarchists are Christians, of course. How do you justify giving away their rights and deciding if their taxes should be 39% or 35%, or increasing foreign wars, which both Clinton and Trump want to increase more wars and more, Trump wants more forfeiture, and Clinton wanted more wars and taxes. How do you justify giving away their property rights? You said we can give away our property rights, to others. How do you give away their property rights when you vote?
What do you mean? No. So that's why you have a system of checks and balances, right? In an anarchist society, there is no system of checks and balances. There is only the gun.
Because nothing has to be.
There is only the playground rules, right? So again, but we do have to engage with each other. We have to. Otherwise, you get. I'll say it. Fine. I really don't like making these types of arguments, but every time that we had that, the society has had anarchy. Not only did you have so in communism in Russia, in Korea, you have stagnation of innovation. In the extremely rare situations where we've had anarchy, we've actually had a reversal of innovation. That's an unbelievable thing to think about.
I don't want to be mean, but it seems like you're using the definition of anarchy, or you're assuming that anarchy will be things blown up in the streets like the public schools want us to believe will happen with anarchy. Anarchy just means there's no government in New Hampshire. You know what that means? There's no government in Tennessee, no government in America. It means people like my mother can finally protect themselves with guns. People like my dad can finally keep half their income that was stolen from them. That's what anarchy means. It means people can.
It also means that people can commit theft. It also means that people can commit theft. It also means that people can commit murder. What exactly is so? The only thing
are universal rights, and no, as they ought to be. Are there a few societies in China who might not believe that? Maybe, I don't know them. But property rights are universal. Don't kill. That is a universal right. Are morals universal or not? I don't know anymore. But in a society, again, we're doing this on the smaller level, a city or a state, or even the U.S. In the U.S., if you ask them about property rights, I would hope that everyone, although some people wouldn't, I would hope that everyone would agree that property rights, that people, shouldn't be killed or stolen from.
Right, and there's the argument for that is you've mixed your labor, your human capital, with the soil. Therefore, you own the soil.
All right.
That's the Lockean perspective on property rights. That's why he argued for, in his two treatises, life, liberty, and property, which then Jefferson basically cut and pasted into our Declaration. So, I still don't see how you get everyone to agree to these terms unless you get people to agree to these terms. And if the terms are not actually prescriptive rather than descriptive, if they're not proscriptive, then they're meaningless. If they are prescriptive, and everyone actually agrees to them, and we have that in some tangible manner, and you have something that exists as a measure to actually enforce that, then that is government. That is government.
Yeah.
What you're describing is government. So I think what you've actually advocated for isn't anarchy. I think what you've advocated for is the furthest extreme of the libertarian model of government.
It is, but here's the issue we still have to reconcile. As I don't think I published it yet, but I'm going to publish it soon. An article titled "Government is Cancer," because government grows. It grows extremely.
Yeah. You sent me the beta.
Yeah, and again, it's got sources and everything, and you couldn't argue against it. The government instituted an income tax of like 1% in 1913. Social Security with FDR was like 0.6%. Now it's income tax 39%. Social Security is another 6.2% plus 6.2% on the other side. Governments grow extremely fast. How? In my libertarian society, even in my dreams, and I'm working on a book. In my dreams, I'll finish the book one day, maybe. But how, even theoretically, can we ensure or even think that maybe we can limit government from growing? And I'm working really darn hard on this.
Revolt. In the end, you and I both have this right.
So you're saying an incumbent right, which is the stupid argument I was making. But I'm glad you agreed that there are some incumbent rights that we just got to do. We just got to take it on.
No. I'm saying that a right is inalienable. Is inalienable.
You're saying it's a duty. It's a duty to revolt every 20 years or so.
No. It's not necessarily a duty, but it is well within your right to revolt against tyranny. Now, where that line is drawn and how you decide to revolt, I think is an entirely separate debate.
What happens when the government rules that revolution is illegal? Obviously, it's treason.
I think that the moment that the government has made an active effort to exterminate at least a certain section of people is certainly at least the ceiling before which that government should be overthrown, but through absolutely violent means.
We empower them. We pay taxes. They're not going to kill us. If they're going to control us, they're going to abuse us. They're going to manipulate us.
Okay.
They're not going to kill us. At some point, obviously, manipulation will
right, and then you would overthrow that for a better government. I would never overthrow that for anarchy.
Yeah. Again, so we can institute a government that does very, very, very little and is somehow constrained. Because again, I've thought about this.
Right.
It is very hard to ensure that a government never grows. Now, one thing that we should have thought of that I put in my constitution is that there can be no amendments, because when you allow them to amend it, they can amend it, but they have to get a majority of people.
That's interesting. That's a really, that we're getting way off topic with that comment, but I'd have to think about that, because that's really interesting that the Constitution should never have been amended, right? Because
the 14th Amendment was a bad idea because I'll be killed.
Right, because the 13th Amendment could have technically, and in 1860, I think it was 4. No, because Lincoln was dead before it passed, so 1865. Yeah, so like the 13th Amendment that prohibits slavery, that could have been done just by like a statement within Congress.
Recognizing property rights. And again, in anarchism, where you have property rights, you can't have slaves, because property rights are respected in ANCAP world, of course.
Well, you can't have slaves. The same way that we had slaves before the 13th Amendment. You just get a group of people together that are bigger and stronger and
in an anarchical
whip people into.
Meaning you can't violate people or coerce them physically.
Well, if you can't, then the thing that prevents you from doing that would be a group of people who are preventing you from doing that, which is government.
Yeah. So again, I'm fine with the government, but it has to be so limited that it's so microscopic.
There is your soundbite. You wanted 1 second. You wanted a 1 second clip. There is your 1 second clip, ladies and gentlemen. I'm sorry, I'm just gloating now. Go ahead.
That's all right. So a few things, and I've written a few articles on this, and we'll have to paste them into the comments in the show notes. A few things. Number one, the government that exists cannot take any money by force. But what if there's a government? How did they make money if not taxes? Yeah, we published an article about that. It's libertylaw.com.
No. I 100% agree with you that there is a society in which you do not need to have monetary contributions to the government be mandatory. Yeah. There is a society where that you could conceive of where taxes are entirely voluntary.
Yep.
Right.
And the second thing in my constitution, which again would only work for a small state or a small county or city, is that no government official can violate property rights, and if they do, they shall be killed. So if they come into your house and say, well, your ceiling is 8 feet high, not 9 feet high, it violates code. Again, in an ideal government, in theoretical, no threats here, theoretically, that person in an ideal government, according to some people, ought to be killed if they violate property rights. If they come onto your property and say that we're going to give you a ticket, you have to pay a $100 fee because your ceiling is 8 feet. Again, I'm not joking. Zoning laws in almost every area of the country.
I know. Yeah. I know. I mean, there is a place for government to intercede into the home. For example, if you let's say you own extremely radioactive material, right? So I am.
If there's
here's the argument, by the way, for nuclear weapons Right. So everyone that's against the Second Amendment says, "Oh, how do you feel about nuclear weapons?" Yeah, I mean, if you've got $10 billion, go ahead, get your right. If you can adhere to the IAC about nuclear nuclear weapons, go ahead. Here's the other thing: we already have rules on the books about how you're allowed to handle, maintain, and store, and actually manufacture radioactive material. And the reason for that, Elliot, is because if my neighbor's wall is right there. If I have plutonium in my room right now, let's take something way more radioactive. Let's take radium, right? Super, super, super radioactive, right? And super, super, super harmful, right? So I have interfered with my neighbor's sovereignty. Yep. I've engaged them into a transaction to which they have not they're not entered voluntarily, right? Because that radiation is going to go right through the wall. So and there is a place for government to say, fine, you can have that radium, but you need to store it. You need to store it, behind 6 feet of concrete.
But even without government, I would argue that there might not be a lot of people with nuclear weapons because they know it's dangerous. Would you be comfortable handling nuclear material? No.
Me personally, fuck no. Not even close. That's why I take the extremely broad perspective of the Second Amendment. If you can somehow get your hands on first things first, weaponized plutonium. Do you know what it takes to make weaponized plutonium?
I want it within a million miles of me, because again, the little bit I understand about chemistry is that it will, decay my body or kill me or poison me. Again, now here's the thing that people don't realize. If the world became anarchist and government disappeared, would you start handling nuclear material and driving 400 miles per hour? You wouldn't, because you don't want to die. Now, in fact, beyond that, most people don't want to die a painful, quick death. They just don't want to die immediately. Therefore, at least the massive majority, probably 99.99% of people, would continue to do what they do very safely. If they think weed is safe, because they're crazy people who think weed is safe, they'll do weed, and that's fine, and it probably is safe. Maybe they're not that crazy after all. If they want to drive that seatbelt, maybe they'll do crazy stuff like that, which I do sometimes too.
I mean, we're arguing a specific within the general, and the whole topic is the general argument, right?
It's all property rights.
Well, I mean, here's the thing. If I want to just, do you remember the episode of Family Guy where Peter discovers that his house is like its own country, and then he annexes Joe's pool and calls it Johio? Right?
I don't remember that, but I remember like Peterlandia or something, or Peterland.
Oh no! It wasn't called Peterland. It was called Pretoria, because the gay bar down by the airport already took Peterland.
Yes, of course.
Yeah. So what happened in that episode is that Peter just instituted playground rules on Joe, because what is wheelchair bound Joe going to do to prevent what happens when his property rights are invaded upon by roving marauders, we'll call them.
The community.
Fat, obnoxious Bostonian accent having.
Yeah. That's what communities do. When someone's property rights are clearly violated, the community can either violently, if it's a violent issue like property rights, or if it's just a similar issue like their house smells or is too loud, they will ostracize that person. And again,
right. But is ostracization, first things first, how do we know that they're going to do that? Number one. And number two, ostracization is not the appropriate response to roving, marauding, violent hordes.
No, the community should ostracize people who do non-violent acts that are bad. Like if they have parties where 12-year-olds can drink beer and stuff, then ostracize them. If they commit violent crimes, like they're murdering their neighbors and stuff, then they should use force. And the community patrol that will spontaneously erupt in a second once police is gone. Some communities already have community patrol or hire private agencies for security, by the way. More than cops in the world, by the way. There are more private security guards than cops in the whole world, I believe. But it'll naturally happen. A spontaneous order. I'm sure you've read Spontaneous Order, but
yes. That's exactly what the War of the Roses was. That's exactly what the state of the 30 years. That's the 30 Years War. You just described the 30 Years War, where one side said, "We're going, what you did was wrong, so we're going to go ahead and kill a whole bunch of you." Right. So the thing was that then the other side said, then somebody else came along and said, "What you guys did was wrong, so we're going to kill you." And then you get another side that says, we're going to kill you. And then you get another side that says, we're going to kill you. And then there is no end until somebody sits down at a table and says, you know what? We no longer have the right to kill each other. We no longer have the right to form these ridiculous militias and just engage in violence as we so see fit. We are going to establish a list of things that we can and can't do. Right. Or maybe we're not going to establish a list of things we can do, but we're going to let, here are the conditions by which you are allowed to engage in some sort of violence. And that isn't even a social contract as Hobbes imagined it, right? That's an even broader perspective of government. But at some point, you do have to come to the table and have that discussion. Now, here's another way this could end, right? What if one of those sides just engages in enough violence to end the retaliatory violence, right? And then they become a military dictatorship, right? So everyone that has survived that and isn't a member of the military dictatorship, right? They have to fear for their lives because of the military dictatorship. But if we're working under the condition that they don't have to fear for their lives from that military dictatorship, well, the one side that was going to commit all this violence has been beaten down to nothing. So there, you don't have to worry about that. And we've already suggested that the military government, right, is not going to be committing violence against you. So in that state, you have a greater surety, a greater protection against violence, even in that absolute dictatorship, where God King's dictation is where he gets his authority. In that circumstance, it is better than anarchy. Not by much, but it is better than anarchy. Now, the moment he starts killing his own populace, then obviously it's not as good as anarchy.
In the U.S. currently, we have 50 examples of small governments that have grown over a few years, call it 20, 40 years, or just a few years, whatever you want to call it. But they've grown and they all violate property rights perpetually and on negative levels. They violate people for nonviolent acts. But you said you would support a government criminalizing some acts that were not strict violence. Would you? Is that the case? And would you give examples?
The nuclear weapons one. That's not a violent act, right? That's just it happens to be the case. So presenting a
clear danger to another person should be a crime.
Right. So anytime that you have interfered with a voluntary transaction, right? So if you bring a party into a transaction against their will, then that is a violation of a variety of their rights. Right. So the way you can do that can be subtle. For example, the radioactive elements is the perfect example of that. So in this case, what you would suggest is that, okay, fine, you can have the radiation, but you got to put it in behind some lead, right? That way you're not killing your neighbors, obviously on accident.
I agree that there should be a lead box. They call it like a hot box or a hot zone or something.
And actually, believe it or not, they're not actually gun restrictions. But in the early days of the United States, there were these restrictions on, for example, firing off a gun indiscriminately after midnight, right? And it was the reason, and it wasn't a ban on guns, right? It was, neighbors getting together and saying, Fred, it's 1 o'clock in the morning. We're trying to get some sleep here. Put your gun away, right? And it was indiscriminately. So it wasn't like he was hunting or defending himself. It was just getting drunk and shooting his pistols up in the air, right? So that's a case where I think it is perfectly okay for there to be some interjection of government. I don't think that it should be much. Yeah, drugs I think are where PCP I think should be illegal. And I'll say that. Here's why I think it should be illegal. And I'll compare it to heroin. Heroin I don't think should be illegal. Heroin turns you into a different human being when you are on it, right? But when it does it, and I'm sure you've seen it with morphine, I don't know if have you ever dripped heroin into somebody?
It's extremely rare in medicine, I believe.
Yeah, it's extremely rare. It's a desperate last-ditch emergency, as I recall. But it is legal, actually, to prescribe heroin during surgery.
I think it was IV formulation, yeah.
Heroin, you just get knocked out. You just sit on your couch, barely conscious, if you're going to call it conscious at all, right? With PCP, there is an externality involved. You no longer have control over your ability to limit yourself to violence, right? Limit the violence that permeates from you. So, and maybe the better way to say right? So it would be like basically the radiation thing. Like the moment you smoke some dust, right? You turn into radium. Right, because there's no like if I have a bar of radium in my room right now, and it's it can't control itself. It is going to go through that wall and radiate into my neighbor's apartment and kill them.
Exactly. And that's bad.
Right. And there's no way for me to control myself on PCP. Right. So that's a case actually where in the case of PCP, I could see that being illegal.
Yeah.
I could see the same thing with crack.
Here's the issue. Here's the issue, though. If you ask me from my experience, medical experience or other, doesn't matter. If PCP is bad, hell yeah, it's bad. Is heroin bad? Hell yeah, it's bad. All opioids are bad. They should be used only for super duper severe pain if you don't have other better alternatives, of course. Now, is nuclear material bad? It is super bad. I don't even understand exactly how bad it is, but I wouldn't touch it. Now, here's the issue. Again, we'll go back to 7 years from now. The governor of Tennessee, I moved to Tennessee. A neighbor who doesn't like me because I have a nicer AR than he does says, hey, Governor Stanello, Axelman has some nuclear material. Why don't you go make sure that his lead standards are up to par? You're going to send your henchmen, your officers, to come into my home.
Henchmen. They're henchmen.
Yeah.
We need to cover that up. They're my henchmen.
Come into my house and inspect. Your goons are going to inspect my house to make sure that I'm in accordance with the 17 lead requirements. And while they're there, they'll make sure zoning is okay and my guns are stored properly and that, I don't have any other illegal material. Now, do you see the issue?
Hold on. No, I do see the issue, but hold on. They have to be able to get into your home and make sure that is actually being maintained.
I don't even have nukes. I said a person reported I did that I had material. I don't have any.
Right. Well, okay. So then perhaps the first thing you do is not necessarily to knock on their door. Perhaps the first thing you would do is outside research, right? Because radioactive materials, first things first, are ridiculously hard to get your hands on, even through illegal means. It's almost entirely basically every ounce of radioactive material in the United States has a tag on it, for all intents and purposes, has a proverbial tag on it, and it's extremely well traced. So now that I guess I'm not debating you on the general anymore. I'm debating on the specific
warrants and all that stuff, and it's a different argument.
Right. And I see your point, but that isn't an argument for anarchy. That's an argument for less government. Do you see what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. Right. That is an argument for a more perfect union.
The argument is that you could say that obviously we agree that government is cancer and it grows extremely rapidly. There are various forms of cancer, various forms of government. Some believe some are better than others. Some believe some governments are better than others. They're all really, really bad. It doesn't really matter what you believe. Some, are different areas. Some grow faster. Some do different functions. Some specialize, right?
Is there any circumstance where a cancer in any way is any benefit to anyone?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. You're the medical professional. Give me an example. Okay. The people are watching at home. Give us an example.
It can cause some weight loss. It can be direct blood flow from other areas. It can alert you to another more dangerous condition that you might have in your body, because obviously when you have cancer, they do massive MRIs and PET scans and other issues. And I think I've heard of other cases where a cancer was actually existing and benefiting them. Obviously, various types of pheochromocytomas can give you more or less types of steroid hormones and other stuff that could be beneficial, although probably an issue if you have more or less of a steroid hormone, but it could be beneficial if you have more. Obviously, if you have a little more HGH, you would do a little better MMA, so it would benefit you a little bit. But so there are some cases, but it's rare, and government is very rare to help you. I would agree that it is exceedingly rare.
So perhaps your analog of cancer is analogy to.
Here's the issue. Now, someone who's going to be some genius, great debater like Mike Sinello will come along and say, "But Alu, everyone without cancer in history has died."
Okay. I'm not making that argument.
Everyone who has not had cancer, 99.9% of people in the history of humanity who have been born, who never had cancer, did die. Yeah, it's true. There are some dangers, right? Without government, without cancer, there are some dangers. Without government, there are some dangers. Was it Jefferson or someone else who said, "I'd rather have dangerous freedom than slave tyranny or something"? Yeah, obviously freedom, liberty versus security, Benjamin Franklin, all his quotes. I would much rather have dangerous freedom than a safe tyranny. And here's the issue. Tyranny, as you have more laws, the more laws we have, the less safe a city is, like Chicago, of course, and New York City, the Bronx, and LA, and Detroit. They're not that safe because they have more laws. Now, you wanted to discuss some examples in America. We don't have examples of anarchy, but compared to New York, New Hampshire is anarchy. We have 1 billionth of the laws. We have 1 billionth of taxes. Our state's budget is $6 billion compared to their hundreds and hundreds of billions, right? Our laws and taxes and everything else, and restrictions on homeschool and guns and taxes and everything else, and laws, no seatbelts, no helmets, nothing. And we're a safer state. We are the safest state to live in, I believe, in one of the countries.
Yeah, that's a relativistic argument. We're talking about absolutes. So the fact that something is closer to anarchy than something else does not make it anarchy. It either is or isn't anarchy.
Both have to agree that in general in America, the less government in the state, the better that state does, including with safety. Now, you think
for the most part.
too far and it'll be too dangerous. Of course, I would argue that anarchism is not inherently dangerous as long as it is a moral people, which
obviously is. There is no the only rule is the playground rule. I'm bigger. I beat you up. I'm king.
But mob rule also exists in government. It's just mob rule, but it's justified because they manipulate people and indoctrinate them to believe that mob rule is okay if they're wearing blue. I've written a few articles how it's mob rule. We do have mob rule. 99.999% of the leaders who make laws.
So what you're talking about is tyranny of the majority. So that means that in a system of government, in an ideal system of government, then you have to have something to check the tyranny of the majority. Now, in anarchy, you have tyranny of the majority, because if we have Anderson Silva, who could definitely kick my ass, then even without technology, I could easily have tyranny of the majority, in that 4 of us could probably beat up Anderson Silva, right? But 20 of us definitely could.
And that's what I'm saying is this. I'll try to use the term in the right way, because I don't use the term sanctioned very often, but I'm using sanctioned in the term of kind of justified and made official, right? Like legalized. In any form of government, there is some, at least when the people are wearing blue and badges and everything, or if a government, politician does it, it is sanctioned violence. When they steal from you, they take from you, they violate your properties, they kill you, it's sanctioned by the government, and society at large is indoctrinated by the government, by their monopoly on force and education and everything else, to justify it. It's government sanctioned violence. In an anarchist state, all I mean when I say I want, anarcho-capitalist society, is no government sanctioned violence, no society sanctioned violence, no violence being justified. That's all I want. I don't want violence justified. It's never justified.
Okay, and I'm telling you that I'm giving you the Hobbesian perspective, which is a government that is not conducting in, well, the Hobbes is taking it to a bit of an extreme, but a government that is not actively killing you is better than a government that is just purely anarchy, or better than the absence of government.
Like Hobbes, as much as I used to, if that's what he said.
What?
That makes me like Hobbes a little less, to be honest, if he says that.
Yeah, actually, his no. He described anarchy, because he was in it better than probably anyone else, and he made it very clear how bad it is. But his prescriptions for government are not in line with the Lockean perspective at all.
Yeah, that's fine. I agree. Anarchist, a total lack of government, the government structure, might not play out as well in some other states throughout the world than it would in New Hampshire, for instance.
Well, it was until we decided to civilize ourselves and form societies that I mean, for example, in the developed world right now, how much violence do we have?
Compared to history, very little, right?
Very, very little. Now, some would argue that that's an element of culture, not an element of government. But
it's society, civilized, yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, at that rate, well, then why is there so much violence in China and North Korea? Because their culture is significantly more. Well, not China. Let's say it's definitely North Korea, but let's say North Korea. There's significantly greater. Vietnam. That culture is significantly more anti-violence than the rest of the Western world, and I'll give you the reason, the proof of that. When the Vietnamese migrate to the United States, if you look at Vietnamese violence rates in the United States, it's way, way below the average, right? But if you actually go to Vietnam, that's an incredibly violent country.
Is the government involved in that violence?
The government is absolutely involved in violence, but even where you don't have much governmental authority in Vietnam, which are basically just like the mountains, where government doesn't bother to go because the terrain is so inhospitable that they don't bother to go up there. But yeah, I mean, it's still incredibly violent up there, where it's not really anarchy, but because obviously the government within their borders can go up there at any time with tanks and blow them up, right? But yeah, so like a society with anarchy, even if we're going on an evidentiary standard, absolutely is more violent than a society with a government that isn't, radically tyrannical. So the Guatemalan Civil War, yeah, okay. I would rather have anarchy, right? During in the Soviet Union, during the Stalinist era of the Soviet Union, yeah, I would probably rather have anarchy.
Yeah, put it this way.
If I was a Jew in Poland in 1939, I would definitely rather have anarchy.
Exactly. So speaking of the Nazi government, again, state-sanctioned violence. It was all legal. Hitler didn't do anything illegal that I know of. It was all according to law. So people who say just obey the law at all times.
The beer hall pushed.
I wasn't familiar with that.
Oh, that was
Um,
illegal.
so again, if you look at history,
The subject when he, I won't call it the Austrian invasion, but let's call it the Austrian invasion. That was against the law.
but if Hitler's the High Chancellor and he says it's the law, it becomes the law, right?
Well, that's because he invaded another country.
Yeah,
right. And the invasion of Austria really, it wasn't the same as the invasion of France, right? Because Austria, with the parts of Austria that he invaded, were largely German, and they were separated. They were separated from their society. They were ostracized from their society. So they were actually on the side of the Germans when that happened in 1938. I don't think it was quite 39, but in 1938. So the German forces just moved troops in there, and they were,
If here's the issue with government, it would be hard. And again, I don't envy you because you're trying to defend the existence of government, albeit small. In the history of humanity, let's go back 100 years or a million years. I would say that maybe 99% or maybe above, nearly all of the violence that has occurred, all of the murder and crimes against humanity have been done by governments. Again, it's hard to compare it to various types of anarchism because there's pretty much no historical evidence.
Yeah, I mean, in the case of war, yes, but that's only because societies have actually
collectivized. Governments create wars.
No, that's not true.
Without the U.S. government existing, we wouldn't be in the 180 wars we're in right now, right?
Well, that's not true. There are plenty of circumstances in which you can have a war that has no government.
Yeah,
the English Civil War.
It would be the spontaneous order militia of America. And you know what? We'd either win or lose in like a day. We'd probably win. But if we lost, we'd be dead. We wouldn't be in
what? In what? So if you're saying that if Japan had invaded the United States in 1945, if they had invaded the mainland, there would be a rifle behind every blade of grass, as they say. Yeah. Yes, that's true. Which means that if there was no standing military, even Hirohito was terrified of the prospect of invading the mainland, which is absolutely true.
Yeah.
But that's also because they were Japan. Now, if it was the German forces of the time, then a mainland invasion of the German forces of the time. Imagine Hitler was a perfect tactician in the war front, which he was far from it. Right? Imagine if he just said to Erwin Rommel, you know what, Rommel, when it comes to war, it's all on you, right? And I'm not going to go pick fights with Stalin, right? Right? And he decided that he was going to use his forces in France and his forces in Germany and his forces in Austria to form a coalition and attack the mainland United States at the time. And not even at the time. Let's say everything worked out perfectly in his favor. And I don't mean perfectly in his favor. Let's say he conducted himself in a perfect manner when it comes to war, right? I think that's a situation where you need a standing army. You have to have a standing army.
You have the military. I just don't want them to be able to use state-sanctioned force against people to either conscript them to involuntary servitude, which is slavery, military service, of course, or use taxpayer money.
I don't disagree with you. I don't disagree with you. And by the way, in times of absolute desperation, the way that you avoid conscription is to just pay your conscripts an exorbitant amount. Like, imagine if we went to war today and we needed to institute the draft, and instead of having the draft, they said, you know what? Anyone who signs up gets a $250,000 check today.
Yeah.
I mean,
and again, if they did it without taxes, only by voluntary donations or other voluntary means of commerce, that would be fine with me. Again, a government can exist as long as they use no force, and most people would say that's no government, meaning they call me an anarchist.
Well,
I understand that people organize. I just don't want anyone to.
Then let's describe Star Trek. Let's take ourselves to the Star Trek world, where there is effectively no scarcity, and technology has gotten us to a point where you can travel instantly across the galaxy. Right? You have transporters. We have way faster than light speed. We have replicators that can make matter from nothing. We have matter reactions. By the way, this is an improper use of the term antimatter when they use it in Star Trek. That make basically infinite supply of energy. Right? We have a society. We have a world where there is effectively no scarcity. Right? In that world, the Federation still needs to protect itself from the Klingons, right? So in that world, we still need to band together to form something that's going to look like a military, which is the Federation of Planets, which is the Enterprise, because the Enterprise is supposed to be a research vessel, but the way it's armed, it is not a research vessel. It's a military vessel. Let's be honest, and everyone in there is basically military. You have uniforms, you have a code of conduct. You have rank order. I mean, that is a military. So even there, they do have a proper government. They have courts, right? If somebody commits a heinous crime, how do we know that they committed a heinous crime, let alone how do we assign an actual proper punishment to them? So that's even in a society where there is no scarcity, right? Mm-hmm. Where everyone is free to pursue whatever the hell they want because everything's free, right? We have replicators. We can make replicators from replicators, right? So it's an anti-scientific world in that perspective. But even in that world of Star Trek, they need government, right? And the courts are the perfect example of this. If we had today a system where it was just voluntarism as you're describing it, how do we know that someone has committed a crime? Right? You have to trump them up, right? You can't just have jughead trials, right? You have to have an organized system of determining whether or not they are guilty of the crime of which they have been accused. And then on top of that, how do we know what punishment is due for that crime? Well, we have to come to terms on that matter, which means we have to have a codified system of punishment, which also means that we have to codify what actually is criminal.
Like anything or nearly anything is better than this, which we know doesn't work, where people with a tiny minor crime, like might have had a weed in their house, go to jail for decades, and cops who have done serial rape and serial murder get 0 jail time.
Well, again, I mean, you know, not having your bushes. I mean, here's one that I could take it to a ridiculous extreme. If you have a town that has an ordinance that precludes bushes from being a certain height, or not even precludes them from being a certain height, you need to maintain your bushes, right? And the town says, Mike, Elliot, you need to maintain your bushes, right? And we have subjectively decided that you aren't maintaining them, right? And you say, F that, I'm not paying the fine. Well, now you're in contempt of court. Now you go to jail. And then if the sheriffs come to your house to take you because you refuse to go to jail, I mean, at the end of the day, what we're talking about, yes, is a gunfight, right? So they could.
That is the best government in the country. That way you describe this is a law in Missouri. Missouri is one of the freest states. That's probably one of the freest towns in the whole country. In New Hampshire, the freest state in the country. Florida, the freest state in the country. We have these laws. We have laws that can easily get someone killed for doing nothing that hurts anyone at all. There are so many things that you can do.
But the imperfections of this government is not an argument for anarchy. It's not an argument against government, right? The imperfections of I'm trying to think of another thing.
There's extremely innocuous. And there's a toss-up. I'm going to go for the toss-up because I already know a little bit about how anarchism would work.
Okay. Here we go. You know, when it comes to laying down decking material, right, for a deck, right, we agree that there are certain grades of wood that you would never use, right? But that doesn't mean that you shouldn't have a deck. That doesn't mean you shouldn't have that decking material for it to have, you know, a top layer, the actual decking on a deck, right? Concrete foundations. Poured concrete is better than block concrete, right? A block style foundation. But that's not but just because, let's say you have a block foundation, right? And it's not as good as a concrete foundation, and that's what you're looking for. That's what you would have in a dream world. Although, and I guess in a dream world, it would be like somehow liquefied poured steel or something, right? Or titanium or something, or pure carbon fiber, right? But that's not an argument to destroy your foundation and not have a foundation. So the fact that the government today is not the ideal government and is not perfect, the imperfections of this government are not an argument against government.
Now, realistically, is there any hope is there any hope? Or what's the most realistic hope that we can actually have freedom in our lifetimes in, let's say, the whole U.S.?
We should probably that's probably a good way to end this debate here.
The answer is no.
Yeah. So I guess
you want to go through the comments?
What is the likelihood that we have a government that manifests in the manner that I would like to see it? 0. In my lifetime, absolutely 0. I think you'd have to have a coup. I think you'd have to have a violent uprising to have government manifest the way I would like it to be manifest. Now, that's not an argument for that coup.
Right? Violence would probably make it worse because it would make the government clamp down and take away the few rights we do have.
Yeah, I mean,
there's no good answer.
Yeah, there's no good answer,
That's
and
why I'm trying to educate people.
you and I are going to be hopefully on this earth for another 50 years. So 50 years is a long time when it comes to the United States government. Maybe we get a string of Calvin Coolidges, you know, right? Maybe we get. I mean, I don't see it happening.
And that's another thing I want to mention. If you were elected a president, still, I wouldn't have freedom after 4 years. Hell no.
No, and that's not because I'm a dictator. That's because, well, and I think rightly, there's very little you can do in 4 years. Very little you can do in 4 years, and that's a good thing.
Power corrupts. And after 10 years in Congress, you and I would both be corrupt statist bastards. And
you think so? You think so?
Absolutely.
I mean, I think after 10 years, you and I would for us to get into government, we'd have to sign up as Republicans. Let's be honest, right? And so I think after 10 years, you and I would probably get sick of it.
Sign up very upset. Yeah, also, it makes
sign up as libertarians and then not get elected.
Yeah, probably. But just being in a position of power, especially in the U.S. government, the power goes to your head so quickly. If you've had any bit of power, you know it. I've been in time C manager positions, and the power goes right to your head. And I'm one of the humble guys because I don't even like power. But just the tiny bit of power that made me intoxicated, drunk with power, it sickened me, and I was disgusted with myself. Now imagine Congress, where every person in the whole city wants to give you money, bribe you, and/or get into bed with you. After 2 years of that, 2 more years, you're reelected. You're raising 30 million, 100 million congressional races nowadays, right? 100 million. You're raising that kind of money. Everyone in DC wants a piece of you. Your phone's ringing off the hook. You can get anything in the world you want. You get out of tickets. That power goes to your head, and you start becoming corrupt and taking more bribes, and just becoming more of an authoritarian. Once you're in the position, the body that has the power, you want them to have more power, and that's just how it goes.
All right. Do you want to do some Q&A?
Yeah, I mean, we have a few comments here. We can look through the comments and answer them, or comment on them if you want. We have a comment: state laws versus federal laws. Again, some people say
I'm not seeing all of them. So you go ahead and do your thing. I'm going to look up. How about you read some questions and give them some answers, and I'll look up some questions.
Someone asked about zoning laws. Why? Because I mentioned zoning laws. Why would you have zoning laws if there's no government? And I pretty much say, hell no. We shouldn't have any zoning laws at all, especially if obviously we have anarchism. But zoning laws shouldn't exist. They're some of the most anti-property rights.
Well, I mean, it's kind of a circuitous question here because if there's no government, there's no law.
Yeah. But I guess asking you maybe, would you support any zoning laws? I hope the answer is no.
Well, again, I gave the example that I offered that,
well, that was a nuclear weapon law. I mean, general zoning laws. Would you make someone get a permit before they fix their cabinets in their house in their kitchen?
No, I think I don't know if I disagree with building permits in certain situations where a zoning law that would, for example, forbid the building of a structure in a certain place where it is certain to fail onto somebody else's property. I mean, I could think of zoning laws that I could get on board with.
Yeah, again, like you said, you should have to prove, like if you're building the Leaning Tower of Pisa or whatever, it's going to fall over and kill your neighbor's property, of course. But that is really a clear present danger. It would be the same thing as randomly shooting, buckshot towards your neighbor. Eventually, they're going to get killed. That is a clear and present danger, whatever that threshold might be.
Well, I mean, and I'll give you another example. If you're building in a swamp and you decide to build a 90-story building, well, no, you're not allowed to do that unless you have a foundation that looks like this. Yeah. Right. So
of course that makes sense.
I could see a case. I could see a case. I would say that if you and I were, first things first, zoning laws should be a strictly municipal thing, strictly town to town thing, because how a building zone, a location for building affects, for example, the surrounding community, only extends to the municipality. Right. Like, and here's what I mean by that. Like I said, if I own a swamp and I'm going to build some 90-story building on the top of that swamp, and we don't have any laws that require that I build a foundation under it that meets a certain series of requirements, or not to build on the swamp at all, then it's pretty much certain to collapse catastrophically. Let's say onto my neighbor's yard.
It's unlikely because are you stupid? You wouldn't build a building that's going too far.
I'm not stupid, but there are plenty of stupid people out there that would do that.
People are stupid. Not a lot of people
that would do that.
Not a lot of people who are building 90-foot buildings want them to fall over and kill themselves and others and waste money.
Right. No, they don't want to. But there
Without
is such a thing as no, I'm not attributing malice. I'm saying incompetence. There is plenty of incompetence in those fields. Believe me.
incompetence,
Civil engineering is a field where there is plenty of incompetence.
so you think buildings would fall down without government laws?
No, not in general. But I think that in this case that
Trillion.
it would be well within the rights of the neighbor of that property. The point of the analogy I'm offering is that how far is that building going to fall? It's never going to extend beyond the municipality. So that's where I think the zoning laws should be limited strictly to the municipalities. And if I had a town where I was God King and could wave my hand and just magically have the zoning laws be what I think they ought to be, they'd probably only be about 2 or 3 pages long. The whole thing.
You never send police to my house to arrest me or kill me if I built a shelf in my house like I built a shelf recently without a permit?
Fuck no. How the hell is that going to affect your neighbor? It's your house.
Do you know how many towns in America do that?
Yeah, I know.
I think it's the majority. Yeah. If you build anything, if you touch anything, my neighbors in New Jersey, my cousins in New Jersey wanted to really replace all their kitchen cabinets. I think they have to get a zoning permit for that.
Okay, so Joe DiGregorio says zoning or building. So I think he's referring to building restrictions versus zoning permitting. So I suggested that 90-story building. I think that would fall under a zoning permitting situation.
Yeah,
rather than building code.
I'm not the expert on that.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're splitting hairs in that as it refers to the debate surrounding government versus anarchy. But yeah, I mean, especially considering a lot of towns have zoning and building as the same department.
Yeah, and Joseph brings up a good point about the courts. The courts are literally state courts are run by the state, county courts are run by the county, and so on, and federal courts are run by the federal government. When you sue someone in the federal government, you will be heard in a federal court, obviously, in general, if it's a federal issue. So the federal judge who works for the U.S. government will rule on a case where one side is a federal government employee, his coworker, and you, some American bastard. How is that not bias? And that is how 99.9% of court decisions in America happen, right? Yeah. They're all inherently biased, obviously. That's another issue with government. If government runs the courts, again, I don't know how courts work in anarchism. I've never thought about it, to be honest. But it can't be much worse than the government running courts and deciding whether the government themselves are right or wrong.
Well, in an anarchist society, it wouldn't be a proper court. It would be a jughead trial.
What's that?
Do you know what a jughead trial is? Oh, okay. So that's so in the late 1800s, in the Civil War, what would happen is that lieutenants would basically, so if you had somebody that was supposedly a deserter or committed some sort of offense in the military, they would just they would just bring them in front of a lieutenant, and the trial would last about 30 seconds, and then an order would be carried out at the whim of the mercy of the lieutenant. So it was usually carried out on a jughead. So the lieutenant is standing on top of the jughead. You've been accused of. It's kind of like, do you remember? Was it Dark Knight Rises, where they had those pig circus courts?
I'm not sure, but I saw it too long ago.
Yeah, that's kind of what a jughead trial is.
But how is that very different from a trial in which the state government rules whether the state is wrong or you're wrong? They're going to
because the lieutenant in this case has absolute authority and discretion to do whatever he wants. And a court, at least on paper, has to adhere to a certain set of terms. Right. So we've agreed to have the courts suggest, here are the laws that the courts have to adhere to. Here is the due process system. Right. So there is a difference. Now, the de facto versus de jure is so you've got a de jure difference and you've got a de facto difference. But it is entirely plausible that the de facto difference can be null.
Any other comments you want to discuss?
I'm going to my page to see if anyone commented on that post. Although I think it would show up in the stream's discussion, no?
No, I think it's just the comments on the first original post.
Yeah, okay. I see the comments didn't go to there. Let me see if we went to news and politics. All right, so we got a little dead air here. So I think that we've accomplished all we were looking to accomplish here.
All right.
So, hey, Elliot, it was fun.
Yeah, that was an excellent debate. Thank you very much. We're hoping to have some more debates with you and I, but also versus others, right? We're willing to debate anyone.
We are willing to debate anyone. If you want to reach out to us, our website is www.libertyblock.com. Elliot, do we have an email account?
Yeah, you can email me, but you can email libertyblock@gmail.com.
Or you can check us out on Facebook. It's at the Liberty Block. I believe it's just at the Liberty Block. Send us a message if you'd like to debate us on really anything, and we will see if we can arrange a situation for that to happen. We do take a libertarian perspective, so Democrats are welcome.
Yeah, I think it'll be a lot of fun, and there are some Democrats who I respect, who I'm friends with, who I do want to debate on various issues, of course. And
All
we're
right.
hoping to get back to maybe every Monday evening or Friday evenings a podcast, but we're still working on it. If you do want to help us, we do need some more manpower to get the podcast and video up and running back to a weekly regular show like we want to do, because we're focusing on articles.
Yeah, so we do need your help. We are looking for volunteers. Again, you can reach out to us on libertyblock.com or at the Liberty Block on Facebook. Where would you say is our greatest need?
Right now, we need people. We have a lot of articles we're working on that we do want to get out because some are time sensitive, and we need help with editing.
We are happy to accept contributions, submissions. Sorry, for articles. We do need some editors that could help us out. So if you could reach out to that. Also, I will be conducting my Sunday night show for anyone who's watching from New Milford. I'm going to be doing my show on Sunday night at 8 p.m. So check me out at Michael Sinello, or that's at Mike Sinello Show. You can look me up on Facebook under Michael Sinello.
Excellent. All right. Thank you very much. It was a lot of fun.
All right. See you tonight.